Thanks for attending the webinar today. Today we have Andy Applegate. He's been coaching for over 13 years, coaching cyclocross for over 13 years, and he currently coaches with Carmichael Training Systems. Andy's going to be going through cyclocross fine-tuning for the second half of the season. So just a couple of housekeeping things before I turn it over to Andy. If you have a question for Andy, enter it in the little question area of the GoToWebinar control panel. Please don't wait until the very end. I'm going to be looking at questions as they come in and getting a list together for Andy for the end. If you have any issues with the GoTo meeting itself, you can also reach me via the question section. And this is also going to be recorded, so we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording if you guys want to go back and watch it again. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Andy.
All right, thanks, Melissa. Thanks for attending, everyone. We had this idea to do a webinar on cyclocross, and since it's so late in the season, I mean, really we're halfway to 2/3 of the way through the cross season, we were trying to figure out a way that we could, get you some information that would, help you immediately for the remainder of the season. Maybe hopefully fine-tune your training here a little bit, give you some workout ideas, some things you might be able to incorporate for the next, 2 months or so of what we have left of the cross season. And hopefully you'll enjoy some of the ideas that we're going to come up with for you. Cyclocross is near and dear to my heart. In particular, I started racing cross in, I believe it was 1994 when I was living over in Boulder. And I really enjoyed it right away. I thought it was a great discipline. And cyclocross is actually responsible for getting me into coaching. Quick little story before we get started. I think it must have been 97, 98, something like that. A friend of mine approached me to help her prepare for Cyclocross Nationals one season. So we started in September, and I helped her with a training program to get her to Cross Nationals in December at the time. And she ended up winning both the collegiate and S-Bar national championship. So after that, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I should start doing this a little more often. So lo and behold, a couple of years after that, coaching became my profession. So never looked back since then. So really enjoy coaching cyclocross, racing cyclocross, and even watching it. So okay, so here we go. Where you are at any particular given time in the season. So, you really need to think about what you have left of the season, how much time you have left, how much training you still have available to you between events, and of course, always keeping in mind what your end goal is. What is your big goal for the cyclocross season? So you need to think about that. And that's kind of what we're going to those of you who are not training with power, we'll make sure we talk about perceived exertion and maybe heart rate a little bit too. But I'll show you some power files. And then we'll kind of say, okay, well, what are potential limiters or weaknesses that you can work on in this last part of the season, and what kind of workout ideas might you be able to incorporate that'll help. So in my mind, there's several different reasons that a person might embark on a cyclocross season. Whether you're racing the whole season or just racing a handful of races here and there. And I bring this up because it's important to remember what your own personal goal is for cross and for racing cross. It used to be a very short season, right? When Nationals was in December, races often in most areas didn't start until late September. So you have, 2.5, 3 months of racing, that's it. The season has become, extended considerably since then. Now most races in most, kind of the hotbed cyclocross areas start at the beginning of September, and most of them, a lot of them, run through the end of January now. now that Nationals is in mid-January, you know, it really makes for a pretty long season. So again, you know, if you remember why you're racing cyclocross. So of course, assume that since if you're on this webinar, you probably are that third person at the bottom there, where cross is maybe a primary focus. It's the most important part of your year. So obviously, you know, everything that you can do, all your training for the entire year is really going to be focused towards getting you the best results you can for the cross season. And most people will either target a series, so you'll want to be going pretty good for most of the season, or you'll be targeting like nationals or, you know, state championships or some, you know, big race that tends to be towards the back half of the season. So that's what you're going to be working towards. If you are a you know, rider who is doing other disciplines as seriously as cross, or maybe even a little bit more seriously than cross, you know, we consider cross a secondary focus. So yes, you want to do well at cyclocross. You want to be successful. You want to improve. You want to be able to, you know, ride well in a series, place well in a series, maybe go to nationals, something like that. But you also combine that with maybe a full season or mostly a full season of road or mountain bike racing. So that's got its own kind of problems, you know, just because it's very easy these days to race year-round, which is something that I try to, you know, make people aware of, that you can do that for a season, maybe 2 seasons, but you have to be really careful because that fatigue builds up, and you end up, you know, the potential for burnout can be really high. If you don't want to, you know, if you're racing mostly year-round, you could really run into some burnout issues. Or are you just racing cross for fun? I mean, maybe you are racing the full season. Maybe you're even going to go to nationals, but you're really just doing it for the enjoyment of it, for the training, and maybe you don't have any particular performance goals. And if that is why you got into cross and that was really your goal for the season, and you have other big goals in the season, like say your real goal is mountain bike, or, you know, mountain bike nationals or something like that, and you're just doing cross for fun, keep in mind your biggest goal. If your biggest goal is mountain bike nationals in the middle of the summer, just keep in mind what really crushing yourself, you know, training hard week after week to, you know, get the best results possible for cross, what that can do to you, and what it's going to do to the beginning of your mountain bike season, and, you know, how much time you're going to have to take off at the end of the cross season before you can, you know, switch over and start, you know, being competitive on the mountain bike again. So a lot of people kind of fall into the trap where they start racing cross with the idea of, I'm just going to do a few races here and there for fun, I'm not really going to train for it. And then, you know, it gets real serious all of a sudden. And even though they don't have any necessarily, you know, it's not their biggest goal of the year, they kind of fall into maybe doing too much, too hard. And then cross is over, they're tired, they have to take a long break. And now the next thing they know, their, you know, big goal mountain bike or road race is really close, and they're not prepared for it, or they don't have the time that they need to prepare for it. So anyway, point being, even at this point in the season, really keep in mind, you know, what are your cross goals, and what are your big overreaching goals. And remember that your big overreaching goals are the ones that you really have to make sure that you focus on, because you don't want to miss out on those because you did something during the cross season, like raced, you know, 2 races a weekend from September through January, and then but most people that becomes very, very difficult. So keep that in mind. Also, you want to assess where your recovery is now. You know, your recovery and your fatigue. You know, those 2 levels. If you're feeling very, very tired now, and you know, you have to be really honest with yourself. If you are exhausted, don't be afraid to take a break. Period. I mean, you can, you know, keep training hard, and your racing, your performance, your results are, you know, they could get worse from here through the rest of the season if you don't allow yourself a little bit of a breather. If your plan is to, you know, race through nationals, race through January, this is actually a really good time to take a break, take a week off. Don't be afraid of it. If you were to say, yeah, okay, honestly, I'm pretty tired. I've been racing, pretty much every weekend since September. Yeah, I still feel like I know I have a long ways to go, but I'm feeling that fatigue, really is hitting me after the race weekend. Maybe it's taking you an extra day to recover during the week before you feel like your legs are back to where you can, get a good training day in. Might be the perfect time to take a break right now. Here in North Carolina, we actually have a very competitive cross season here in North Carolina, believe it or not. Rarely is there racing the weekend of Thanksgiving, which when Nationals was in December was terrible because it was usually just a couple weeks before Nationals when we needed to be racing. But now with Nationals in January, it's really a great natural break to the season. You take a week off from the season. So again, don't be afraid to take a little bit of time off. You're not going to lose much fitness in a week, tiny bit, but the freshness that you gain from that recovery is going to benefit you huge. You're going to be able to train a little bit harder. You're going to be a little more fresh for those upcoming races. So again, I see a lot of athletes, a lot of riders who they think, oh, here I am in the middle of the season. If I take some time off, I'm going to blow the rest of the season. Not the case. You have a greater chance of blowing the rest of the season by doing too much right now or not taking that recovery week than you would if you took a little bit of time off. So think about that. Kind of determine if that's something that you need to do now, because again, now's the time to do it, not necessarily in 3 weeks. In December, you want to be pushing through. Again, if the goal is Nationals or the end of the season in January, a break time is now. Not really in January, not really, hate to say it, I know a lot of people, have a hard time, they have a lot of family commitments around, Christmas, New Year's, but if you're training for Nationals, that Christmas, New Year's block, man, that's when you can really do some hard training, or really, you should be doing some hard training. So it'd be good to kind of plan for that now, take some time off now, get some equity, some equity with the family, also that you can do a little bit of hard training coming up in the next month. Also, when you're taking a break, or even if you're not taking a break, now is a great time to really perfect what your training strategy is between now and the end of the season. Perfect time now. So let's have a look at what the actual demands of cyclocross racing are. Not sure if this slide came up for you guys yet. There we go. This is a race file. This power file. You can see the heart rate is red at the top. Yeah, it looks pretty stable, right? Yellow is power. So that's the squiggly line. That's actually the lowest. You can kind of disregard the green and the blue. That's cadence and speed for now. So if you look at the yellow line, that really tells us the most about what the actual demands of this cross race was. And we could line up 10 files from cross races next to each other, and I could guarantee you, there might be, an outlier here and there, but I can guarantee you most of them are going to look really, really similar to this one that you see. Believe it or not, there's a lot of up and down, up and down, up and down, power on, power off, power on, power off. That is what cyclocross racing is really all about. Every once in a while, you might run into an event that has, like a really long straightaway, or like a hill that takes a significant amount of time to get up. But in general, it's going to be very short periods of very, very high intensity, followed by very short periods of recovery. You're letting off the gas, getting around a turn, and then you're back on the gas to get up to speed after the turn, and you're doing that again and again and again. You can kind of see in this file where it does fade a little bit. And it's pretty steady. And if you can see, it's right about 355-ish, I believe. He's a big, strong rider, an elite rider for sure. And you can really see how much of that yellow power curve is above that threshold line. And you can also see that there's not a whole lot of steady anything that is right around that line. So that's the opposite of what you might guess if you saw that heart rate profile. So if you took out all of this data except for the red line at the top, you might be tricked into thinking that this was a much more steady effort, but it's not. So again, since power meters have become more popular, a lot of guys are training and racing with them. We really get a really clear picture of exactly what is required to excel at cross races. And that's it. It's short, high-power efforts repeated again and again and again and again. So that's something that you need to remember, when you're crafting your training, especially at this time of year, because, if this was early season, we'd be talking about, hey, what do I need to do to prepare for the entire season? What do I need to build up? What kind of energy systems do I need to work on and all that stuff? That's early season. That's preparation. But now, most of your training wants to be focused on the very, very specific demands of the races that you have coming up in the next month and a half, 2 months. So the workouts that you're doing should really up quick, hopefully. This is basically a detail of the previous slide. There you go. I think you can see it now. So this is like the first, probably it's like a lap and a half here. You can see if you look at the blue lines, you can see that's where the lap is. I think it's like 6 or 7 minutes here. So this gives you even a better idea of what's going on. Again, there's hardly any steady power in this at all. This is a lap, and it's a mostly flat course, and it's on the gas, off the gas. If you were to break out, some of these sections where you can, see the higher power sections and the sustained power, it's only like the longest one is like 15 or 20 seconds. So that is kind of like what do we want to think about when we say, okay, well, what kind of workouts do we need to do that are going to be really specific to this kind of effort? So again, the demands of cross racing, number one, and this is definitely the biggest thing, the most important thing, is that cross racing really is these very short, intense efforts repeated for the entire length of the race, whether that race is 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. That's what it's all about. So next is, as most people know, the start of a cross race is crazy, right? Most people will say, well, cross race is like, it's kind of backwards of a crit or a road race even. You sprint at the beginning instead of at the end. Sometimes you have to sprint at the end as well. But cross races go out really, really, really hard. Everybody who's done a cross race knows that. So that is definitely a huge part of the demand of the racing. You have to be able to basically sprint off the line, maintain a seriously above threshold effort for a little bit, and then you need to maintain the ability to produce high power, that on again, off again power over and over again through the entire race. And if you fade much, you're going to get caught, you're going to get passed, you're not going to get the result that maybe you want. So the repeated efforts, starts, skills, obviously very, very important. When most people think about cyclocross skills, they think, oh, I got to go out and practice getting on and off my bike. Yes, definitely. That's definitely an important skill. You need to be able to, quickly dismount, get over barriers, get up a hill, remount. However, the number one skill that you need to be really good at for cross, if you want to have good results, is turns. And sometimes that seems counterintuitive. People, they think, oh, turning, I know how to turn my bike. Well, turning is absolutely the crux of cyclocross performance. If you can get your bike around a turn, any radius turn, any surface, wet, dry, solid surface, loose surface, sand, gravel, pavement, you need to be able to get your bike around the turn in any situation while maintaining as much momentum as possible. That's one of the biggest things that wins cyclocross races, or at least gets good results in cross races. If there's a rider who is really skilled at turning, even if their threshold is lower than the rider next to them, the rider who's really good at turning can, usually keep up and oftentimes even beat the rider who might be stronger. So I always tell people, if there's one skill you want to work on more than any, is turning. If you're not good at it now, also tactics, definitely come into play. And a lot of times you think of tactics as being just at the front of the race. So you think, oh, tactics, that's only for the fast guys. Well, yeah, I mean, tactics, that's oftentimes what's going to win you the race, especially if you're evenly matched with other riders. But I think I would also put within tactics, on a personal level, I think I would put pacing in there as well. So, it's kind of your tactics about how you pace yourself. Doesn't matter whether you're at the front, the middle, or the back of the race you're doing. If you are not pacing yourself properly to get the most out of yourself, you're not going to get as good a performance as you might otherwise. For example, if you are a really, really fast starter, you have a great first lap. Hey, that's awesome, because again, that's one of the big important things for cross racing. But then you die after 6, 8, 10 minutes, and you get past, and you finish back of the pack, or mid pack even. Well, maybe you need to change your pacing tactic, or at least try it. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But tactics is not just about the front 5 guys. It's also it's yourself, it's your own pacing, and it's your tactics within whatever group you happen to be riding with. I mean, geez, maybe you're riding for 15th place or 20th place, but it's still nice to be able to use tactics to be able to get ahead of the guys that you're riding with through most of the race. So taking a short step back here, wait for this slide to load. Hopefully you can see it soon here. When we looked at just the heart rate of that race file, you could kind of see that it was pretty flat. Not sure if you guys can see this yet. Whoops. Anyway, what this slide is going to show is a side by side, and on the left is a time trial. It's a relatively flat, maybe slightly rolling time trial, and you can see the heart rate curve at the top is really flat, and it's not too dissimilar from the race file that we saw. So again, just kind of to contrast here, that while the heart rate curve is similar between a road time trial, it's a road time trial, and a cyclocross race, the power demands are exceptionally different. Back in the days when we only had heart rate monitors to look at, you might be lulled into thinking that, hey, to get better at cyclocross, I need to go out and do, more work like I would do to prepare for a road time trial, because that's what my heart rate profile looks like. Those longer, steady efforts. Yes, in one way that's a good way to prepare you for the season, in that it helps elevate your lactate threshold, which is exceptionally important, of course. However, it doesn't necessarily mimic the demands of a cross race. So as you get more specific with your training, I would say, if you want a specific workout, a steady time trial-like workout is not necessarily the one you want to do during the season when you're trying to be really specific about what you need to do during the races. So hopefully you guys can see these slides. This next slide is, the race detail that I showed earlier, where you could see the amount of effort above that threshold line, that yellow horizontal line. And, again, trying to figure out what is going to mimic that as closely as possible. You can see here the slide on the left is a workout that we call 15-15s. So it's basically 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off. Pretty much as hard as you can go during the on sections, and then just a very short 15-second recovery. And this is about the closest workout that I have found to mimicking the demands of a cross race, or definitely one of them. So this is this is one of the key workouts, especially right before the cross season and during the cross season, that I have a lot of racers do. And I'll have them do a large volume of these, because if you think about it, if you're, you know, an elite racer, or, you know, a category 1, 2 racer, and you have an hour to race, basically you're doing an hour of this type of effort. So it's a 5-minute recovery between each of those 10-minute blocks, or maybe even more if they're you know, a really strong rider and can handle a pretty big training load. I might have them, you know, 4 by 10 minutes wouldn't be out of the question. You definitely wouldn't want to do any more than what your race duration is. So, for example, if you know, if you're doing a 45-minute race, you know, there isn't really a reason to do an hour of these, or it's not that dissimilar. It's actually fairly good workout to mimic the demands of the cross race. Again, the scale is a little bit different from one to the other. So I think you have to shrink down the 15-15s a little bit, and it would match a little bit better. So basically, it's when you know, I'll tell the riders, like, hey, you know, go to a local park, make up a practice cross course. You know, you don't need any tape, you don't need any markings. You just say, okay, I'm going to go up, I'm going to go around that tree, I'm going to go down that path, I'm going to turn around the soccer goal. You know, you kind of make up a cross course that, you know, it's probably a little bit less than a full lap in a race might be. Maybe it's 3 minutes long, maybe it's 4 minutes, 5 minutes long. That would be appropriate. And then we're going to do intervals on that lap, and we're going to say, okay, I want you to go out and do, you know, 3 by 10, 3 by 12, 3 by 15, you know, basically as close to race pace as you can get on that course. And how does that stack up? Well, in this particular instance, and this is the same rider from left to right, so it's the same guy, and you can see that the race simulation, again, which is on the left, is pretty darn good. However, you'll also notice that the power way to you know, get some good specific cross training in. However, most people, when they go out and you say, okay, do a race pace effort, are not going to be able to reproduce what they can do in a race, you know, midweek by themselves. With a training partner, it gets a little bit better. You know, usually we can see those numbers come up a little bit. If it's a group training effort, even better. But you wouldn't expect most riders to be able to do, you know, midweek, you know, group training race. You know, hit that specificity. But again, you have to keep in mind, it's probably not going to be completely race intensity. So, real quick, let's get on to, you know, what are possible limiters for cross racing. Okay, so again, you have to sit back, look at your season, think about it, think of your results, think about how you felt during the races, think about where you felt the worst, think about where people passed you, think about where you felt bogged down, where your legs hurt, where, you know, really kind of make an honest assessment of what you are good at and what you are not good at compared to your peers. You know, you don't need to compare yourself to, you know, the best riders in the country, or, you know, even riders in a different category. Compare yourself to the riders in your category in the race that you want to get the results in, right? So if you're racing Cat 3, compare yourself to the guys who are at the front of your race. Okay, what's the difference between what you have right now as far as fitness and skills and what they have? You know, how much are they beating you by? What can you do to close that gap? You know, what if you can improve a particular area, would that get you closer to those guys? And if you can identify those areas, then you can work on them, and you can still see some really serious gains between now and the end of the season if you can identify the correct things. So, going through these really quick, 4 starts, okay? So, you start, you feel like you're going all out, you are drooling, you are, gasping for air, and yet everybody passes you, even if you start near the front. Or, you're in the middle of the pack, and you are, even though you're going as hard as you can't really get by anybody. Okay, if that's the case, so be it. Now, what can we do to work on it? So that's one. Skills is another thing. If you feel like, hey, I'm getting gapped out of every turn, I am getting gapped at the flat barriers. Every time I'm with a group, I hit the flat barriers, and I'm 3 seconds behind them when I get back on my bike and get going again. Identify that. That is absolutely something you can work on right now. Looking at some of those specific workouts that we saw in the race file, if you don't have the ability to continually through the entire race produce those high power efforts over and over again, that's something you can work on. If you have a serious late race fade, like for example, if you're doing an hour race and you are great for the first half and then you lose 10 places in the second half of the race, identify that. And again, that one's a little bit tough to work on at this point in the season, but you can definitely work on it. So it's worth it. As long as you can identify that that's what happens, think about, let's think about why, and let's think about, some workouts that you can do to address it. Are you making tactical errors? Again, that one's easy, right? Because if you can identify the tactical errors, you can correct them, because most of the time that's your mind. A lot of times, if you don't sit back and really think about it, you just go and you race. It's like, and you just kind of say, oh, I'll do better next time, but you don't really assess your race and figure out why a particular thing happened. You kind of are doomed to repeat the process over and over again. So if you really think about it, it's like, oh yeah, man, I was riding in that group and yeah, I wanted to take the clear line, so I stayed on the front like for 4 laps. And then wonder why, I got attacked and everybody in that group beat me. There is definitely something to being on the front and being able to pick your own line in most courses. But, drafting even at relatively slow speeds can sometimes have a pretty decent effect and really get you if the guys behind are working even a couple % less than you. That's a tactical error. Things like that. So again, think about what you're good at, what you're not good at. Equipment issues as well. See, a lot of guys tend to have it's always an equipment issue. Always, it's like I broke a wheel here and flat tire there, and you have to have your stuff dialed, but also you have to have the stuff that works for you. So super light wheel set. If you're a really big rider and you ride hard and you're aggressive, maybe you need a little bit sturdier wheel set or something like that. Don't want to talk too much about equipment in this. It's kind of out of the scope of this webinar. But you can identify that. If you always have an equipment issue, say, okay, I got to figure this out. What do I need to make sure that everything works perfectly for the rest of my races? Again, that one is fairly easy compared to some of the training things that take a lot of some really hard workouts to improve. So let's kind of go through these one by one. I think we're doing pretty good for time, probably talking too fast. But anyway, so okay, the first one, let's look at this ability to produce repeated short duration, high power efforts. Again, what kind of workouts can you do to improve this? I talked about this enough probably just a little bit ago. 15-15s are fantastic. That's like my #1 go-to workout to address this issue. And again, that's 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off. You can either say, oh, I'm going to do 15, 20, 30 of these 15-15s, and then that's it, which is a hard workout in and of itself. Or you can say, I'm going to really tax myself and really get to what the demands are of my cross race, and you can do a bigger amount of volume. For example, 2 by 10 minutes of 15 on, 15 off, 3 by 10 minutes, or even a little bit more. Fantastic workout. You could extend the time a little bit. You know, instead of 15 seconds, you can make it 20 seconds. You could make it 30, although 30 for cross racing may be a little bit long. Every once in a while, you'll hit a cross course that requires, you know, a 30-second all-out effort, other than the start. But most of the time, the efforts, if you break them out, are shorter, so it's better to work on the shorter ones. Again, the key here is that you're doing this very short, high-power effort, and the recovery is short as well. So you want to make sure you're doing, you know, 1-to-1, essentially work to rest for these. You know, so if you're doing 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off is good. And again, if you can work the volume up, you're going to find that these are really, really effective at helping you feel a lot better and feel like you can reproduce, you know, high power again and again and again. And even with short amounts of time, your body can kind of learn to recover between those efforts. Another good workout is doing a tempo session with bursts every, you know, 1 minute, 2 minutes. Now again, it doesn't look exactly like a cross race power file. However, it does kind of get at the heart of the matter. You know, so where you're riding at a pretty hard level to begin with, and then you're essentially sprinting for, you know, 15 seconds, or sometimes you know, count 12 pedal strokes or something like that. Can work really well. Short over-under sessions are good. I'll show you a couple of these files also in a minute here. If you're not familiar with over-unders, what they are basically is the under section is just below threshold, and the over section is just above threshold. So working on these you know, short, repeated, high-power efforts, if you do very short back and forth, like as opposed to doing like a couple of minutes under, a couple minutes over for X amount of time, doing like 1 minute below, 1 minute above, 1 minute below, 1 minute above for X amount of time is a better choice to target that kind of weakness. You know, you might argue that, you know, a minute's kind of long. However, these are very effective at you know, teaching your body how to, you know, kind of oscillate just above and just below threshold, which is, you know, essentially you know, a big part of cross racing too. So they work well. And then good old power intervals. Power intervals, same thing as, you know, people will call VO2 max intervals, basically where you're doing, you know, somewhere between 1 and 4 minutes. I like 3 minutes myself to really hammer on these mostly. So, you know, longer VO2 max efforts where you're just, you know, pretty much all out till you are, you know, just suffering. Minute efforts. So if you're doing like 5 by 3 minutes, 6 by 3 minutes, that is a super effective workout to help your body learn how to really work hard and recover from very anaerobic efforts. If you're doing 3 minutes, pretty much as hard as you can go, you are way above threshold. Hopefully, from a power perspective, we're hoping for these efforts that you can get somewhere in the realm of, you know, 115, 120% of lactate threshold. That's what we would expect out of a power interval, VO2 max interval. From a heart rate perspective, a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm doing these 3-minute efforts, but my heart rate doesn't get into zone until the end. Well, yeah, because, you know, again, that's not necessarily in the scope of this webinar, but the idea being that heart rate lags behind. So for short efforts, and for pretty much all of these that I'm talking about, if you rely on perceived exertion as much or more than heart rate or power, obviously if you have a power meter, fantastic, but if you don't be afraid to rely on perceived exertion more than heart rate. If you are going all out, or doing a power interval, doing a VO2 max interval, you're probably going all out. Doesn't matter what your heart rate is telling you. First 3-minute interval, heart rate might not even get into zone, right? It might get just up to threshold, or maybe not even up to threshold. Second one, maybe it gets to threshold, maybe a little bit above. And third one, finally, oh wow, here, look at that, we're finally, you know, getting up towards range. And then, you know, go up from there. But that's very, very common. So again, that's a question I get all the time. The shorter the effort, the less you can rely on heart rate as a metric to tell you how hard you're going. use perceived exertion, and obviously if you have a power meter, that's even better. Okay, so look at through some of these workouts, because they're all really, really good. I showed you this before. Again, the 15-15s are on the left. Super high power on, off, on, off. Very closely mimics the demands of a cross race. Again, it's about the closest workout that I've seen that can really get to the heart of it. Plus, what I also find is that when you're doing 15 on, 15 off, you can really get some high power numbers, and depending on the volume that you're doing them, but I usually don't see too much fade until the very last bit. So you can really produce some high powers, some really hard efforts for 15 seconds, and that's going to give you the best results. This next one is that tempo with bursts. This particular workout, it looks like he didn't get the burst in at the very end of the tempo session, but that's okay. You can still see where the horizontal line is threshold, basically. So tempo is below threshold, and I think most of the zone systems that are out there, tempo is pretty similar percentage of lactate threshold. Ours is somewhere, I believe it's 88 to 93%, something like that, of lactate threshold. So again, just a little bit below threshold, and then those bursts are super high. You can't necessarily see the exact numbers, but it looks like most of the bursts go up into the 800-ish watts, 700 watts, something like that. And you can see that heart rate, the red line kind of drifts upwards, and that's as expected as well. If I didn't see that red heart rate curve kind of slanting upwards to the right, I would argue that the rider wasn't doing the burst hard enough, or wasn't, maybe we had his threshold set too low or something like that. We expect that kind of slight drift up to the right with the heart rate for a workout like this. But it's a pretty good one. And again, it doesn't necessarily mimic exactly the cross race power profile, but it's pretty good. And here's a hopefully this file will come up for you. This is a over/under, so 1 minute under, 1 minute over. Again, the yellow dashed line is threshold, so you can kind of see where he did a nice job of just a little bit below threshold and a little bit above threshold. Back and forth for each of those 8 minutes. I would consider a 4 by 8 minute session not particularly difficult. You might stretch those out to where you're doing 4 by 10, 3 by 12, 4 by 12. If you're doing it again, if you're doing an hour-long race, you might say, okay, I'm gonna come pretty close to targeting that hour of effort during a particular workout, and it's going to be harder the closer you get to that, but it can be really effective. Okay, so next, try to roll through these pretty quick so we have enough time to get through everything. Talk about starting a little bit. Again, start's the most violent part of a cross race. You got to be really got to be on it. The bigger the field, right, the more important the start is. If it's a really small field, it's not that big an issue, because if you think about it, the biggest problem with not being able to start well is not that the other guys are necessarily getting that far ahead of you, because if they pace themselves wrong, hey, you might be able to catch them. The big problem is all the guys in your way slowing you down between you and the leaders. So as soon as you get stuck behind a rider that's going around turns slower than you, not getting up that hill, or slowing you down at the barriers. I mean, every time you're hitting a turn, if you're not going as fast as you could go through that turn, you're wasting energy because you have to get back up to speed, and the leaders are getting further away from you. So again, starts are absolutely critical. One of my favorite things to address this is to do, kind of like an extended reverse ladder session. And what that means is basically you start super hard and then you kind of step down the intensity. I'll show you a file in a second on that. But that's definitely one that you can do, and you can kind of alter the amount of time in each zone depending on what you want to do. There's no magic amount of time in each zone, but the idea being that you basically you sprint and then you step down to above, just above threshold, then maybe right around threshold, then maybe right below. And you stretch that out, and that can really help you. Race simulation sessions are really good for this with relatively short efforts. So you're not going out and doing, 15-minute efforts. Maybe you're doing hot laps. Maybe you're doing that practice cross course that you made up, but you're doing one lap, and after one lap you're going to rest, and then you're going to start the next one as if it's a race start. So basically you're going all out and as hard as you can for like the entire lap. And that's going to be fairly specific, and you really have to push yourself at the beginning. So, no holding back for the first 2 minutes. You're going to, kill it for the first 2 minutes, and then just try to hang on through the rest of the lap before you recover. Those kinds of things can work really well. The mental aspect of cross starts is huge. It's crazy, you have to be, I don't want to say be super aggressive, but you really have to be a little bit defensive. You can't be too afraid to, shoot through holes. You can't be tentative at all, because as soon as you let off the gas a little bit at the start, 5 guys go by you. And that's, there's a lot of psychological strength there that you need to be able to, really push it and have confidence in yourself and all that. So, again, not really getting into the mental side of things here necessarily, but just be aware that, if you can steel yourself to like, okay, I'm going to hold my spot. I'm going to go as hard as I can. I'm not going to let guys ahead of me if I don't have to. You don't want to block guys who are faster than you necessarily. However, you don't want to give up spots if you don't have to as well. So, just keep in mind that there is a pretty big mental aspect to cross starts. I'll look at a couple of these files here. The cross start simulation should be coming up for you here in a second. Not sure if you can see it yet, hopefully. So you can kind of see in this file, on the left, you can't really see too good, but there is a sprint there for the first little bit, and you can kind of see, not sure if you can pick out the powers of each of those. This is, again, I have the threshold is the yellow dotted line, and it's about 350. So you can kind of see that first 5-minute section, targeting above threshold and then stepping down to right about threshold, and then just below, and you can kind of see that whole last 20 minutes there where we are doing bursts along with it. And again, that's just to make it a little bit more specific. Again, it doesn't necessarily matter how long each one of these segments is. You could shorten this whole thing and it would be very effective. Maybe you could do it twice or maybe even 3 times if you shortened it considerably. To where you basically do a sprint at the beginning, then a few minutes of VO2 max, essentially power interval type effort, and then you step down to about threshold, then maybe a little bit below threshold, just to maintain relatively high power while your legs are fatiguing. I think that's important. So you don't want to do them too short. Like you wouldn't want to do necessarily a 3-minute one if you want to really work on this, because then you could just do a power interval. But if you stretch it out and you use that step down effect, you can get a longer effort and really see some benefit from it. Now, you might argue it's like, okay, well, let's put this against the cross race file that we had up earlier. It doesn't match up exactly. However, I would argue that this workout, more so than from the power profile, and again, you can do these workouts on perceived exertion. You don't necessarily need a power meter to do it. A little bit below. So, the more experienced you are, the easier that is. But again, you don't need a power meter for these. But I think if you see the power file, it can be very valuable, because if you look at just the heart rate, you can't really tell that there's a step down, right? You can see at the beginning maybe there's a tiny bit of recovery of each step down, but then it's pretty similar. So heart rate's not necessarily the best for these. But again, my argument for this would be that even though the power profile does not match up exactly with what you might actually see for a cross race, the perceived exertion matches up really well. So like what you're feeling. All right. again, try to get through some of this other stuff pretty quick. If you're fading late in the race, what can you do to help that? Again, this is a tough one because this comes back to the anaerobic system tends to respond really quickly to hard efforts and you know, a handful of workouts, whereas you know, when you talk about endurance, even if it's endurance at very high effort level, it tends to take more work, so it tends to take more time. So you know, it might take, you know, a month to really see a huge improvement of this. However, that doesn't mean you can't do a bunch of workouts that target it. Long race simulation efforts are great. Steady states, you know, and steady state is just below threshold, right? So steady state is about, I want to say 93 to 95, and then, you know, 93% to 99, 100% of threshold. So just below threshold for a long period of time. Also, one thing that you can think about when you're doing those, again, not necessarily something that I put for everybody in the middle of the season. Usually this is like a preseason workout or a beginning of the season workout. But if you want to throw one in, if you're fading a lot, maybe think about negative splitting these type of efforts, meaning that first one is right around, you know, the lower end of the zone, maybe 93, 95% of threshold, and then the next one is a little bit higher, and then the next one's a little bit higher. So basically you're getting stronger as you go, forcing yourself, you know, to take it a tiny bit easy on the first one and then higher power on the next ones. Or, you know, these you can use heart rate for. Again, longer efforts are usually pretty good for heart rate. So, you know, you might say, okay, well, my second one, I'm going to try to get that heart rate a couple of beats higher, that kind of thing. That's good. Long over-under sessions. So basically, instead of like an 8-minute one, do like a 15-minute over-under, where you're doing, you know, again, the 1 minute is good for cross, I think. You could extend those to 2 minutes or something like that. But again, the length of the overall effort should be longer if you want to target this kind of like race endurance. Longer tempo with bursts. You know, 50 minutes is pretty good. If you're doing an hour race, that's pretty good, but that can help. Again, if you're fading late in the race, look at your tactics, and by tactics I mean pacing here, so it's kind of personal tactics. If you are fading a ton late in the race, so, you know, hey, you're riding in the top 10 at the beginning and you're fading to mid-pack or worse at the end of the race, take a race and say, okay, I am going to hold myself back. I'm going to start a tiny bit less. Now, not the first 10 seconds. You're full out the first 10 seconds, right? But then instead of like slotting in, you know, 3 wheels from the front, let 6 or 8 more guys ahead of you, maybe even a couple more than that. Just back off just a touch and see if that doesn't help your late race power. Maybe it will. So then maybe the next thing you know, it's like, well, I backed off a little bit, but now I'm attacking past guys and I'm getting up to that lead group 2/3 of the way through the race. You know, maybe that's what the issue was. So don't be afraid to you know, examine tactics and maybe try something different like that. Wow, running out of time already. I don't want to, you know, we could talk all day just about skills, obviously. You know, there's lots of different skill aspects to cyclocross. Identify the ones that you are weakest at and work on them, hammer them, you know, do it over and over again. Is it dismounts? Is it turns? Is it, you know, whatever the case may be. Don't be afraid, especially now, you know, and again, if you're taking an easy week or something, do some skills workouts where you're not worried about intensity. So you're going out and saying, okay, I'm really bad at flat dismounts, fast dismounts. I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend an hour and I'm going to do 50 of them. But I'm not going to do them full out, because if I do them full out, I'm going to make a mistake. And if I don't have that confidence in the race, I'm going to go slow. So what you want to do is you want to slow the skills down, slow them down, slow them down, slow them down. Make sure you get the basics right, the skill, the basic aspects of the skill, and then speed it up slowly, gradually speed it up, and that will pay off. And you can do that in a workout that is not taxing. You could do that during a recovery week. You could do that during an easy ride. Spend some time on it. Don't be afraid to slow the skills down. Find other riders who are really good at those skills. Watch them. Get them to help you. You know, you can watch videos and things, but having someone there to watch you and you watching someone in person is the best way, absolutely the best way. You can watch guys at races too, but it's good if you have someone there who can maybe do the skill a little bit slower for you than race pace, where you can really kind of, get a better idea. We could talk all day about running. Is running necessary for cross? Not really. You're not on your feet that long. A lot of times you can do, just your skills drills and things can take care of that. Other people like to run, so it's not bad to add in. Again, we won't get into that too much. Cool. Okay. Tactics. I think we talked about most of this. Think of what you have done, what you're good at, what you're not good at, and execute. When you make a plan, you say, okay, well, I'm going to back off a little bit beginning of this race and things like that. Make sure you execute the plan that you have in mind going in, not just going in and saying, oh, well, I made that plan, but forget it, I'm just going to go. Really think about it and then do what you thought about, and I think you'll gain a lot from it. Most people will say that they like to break down a cross race into 3 parts: beginning, middle, and end. Beginning, you're pretty much all out, getting in the group that you're going to be in. The middle, you're kind of stabilizing, and then the end, you're trying to move up. And you can think about which one of those 3 parts is where you are least good. Are you bad at the start? Are you bad, in the middle you fade too much, or at the end you're not able to, hold the pace, whatever. If you're doing training races, midweek races, if you have any of those in your area, don't be afraid to try different things. Don't go out and just say, oh, I'm just going to go all out as hard as I can go for this. Say, okay, well, I'm going to back off and I'm going to go hard, at the end of however long that race is. Or I'm going to, if that's the opposite of what you do, if you tend to, not start hard and then come on at the end, try starting all out. Like say, okay, I'm going to do the first lap where I'm not going to be able to pedal after the first lap because I went so hard. See how your body responds. Training races, perfect time to do it. Yeah, race your strengths and attack others' weaknesses. So if you're with a group of guys and you know that they're slower over the barriers than you, hey, where do you attack? Right before the barriers, as you're going over the barriers, right? And then you get your gap and you establish it. So yeah, you watch the guys that you're riding with, watch your competition, figure out what their weaknesses are, and capitalize on it. And if their weakness matches your strength, you'll probably be able to drop them. I included this warm-up here, so we won't go through it necessarily because we're just about out of time, but I just thought it was cool because warming up, because starts are so important, warming up is really important. And this is just an idea for you. Have a decent warm-up. Course reconnaissance is essential, so make sure you know when you can get out on the course to look at it. Find out when that is, get there in time to do that, even if you have to get up really early in the morning. Okay, sorry, I think I burned through all of our question time, but more than happy to answer questions if anybody wants to stick around. That was all I had. Sorry I had to rush through some of the end stuff there.
Hey, Andy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, we got some good questions that came in, so let's take a couple of minutes and just run through them. And like I said on the chat, if anyone needs to drop off because of time, go ahead and do that. You'll be able to listen to the full recording, and we'll probably have it posted in the next day or so. Or you can hang on the line and wait until the end, so it shouldn't be too much longer. Okay, and I see that there are a couple more coming in. So some of the questions that I collected while you're going through things, the first one is, getting sick at this time of the year seems inevitable. How does one go about adjusting their training or racing schedule? Do you jump back in? Do you replan the remainder of the season? Love to hear your feedback on that.
So you said getting sick, is that correct? Yeah,
getting sick.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, certainly it's always a little step back when you get sick. First of all, don't panic. It's part of life, right? Exactly when you can and when you should and shouldn't train. If you have a fever, do not train. I'll tell you that right now, period. If you have a fever, do not train, rest. Your body is taxed to the limit, and doing any kind of training is not going to help you, and it could even be dangerous, really dangerous. So fever equals no training. chest cold, be very careful. Don't train much, if any. If you're coughing up a lot of stuff, a lot of chest congestion, that's bad. If you have like a head cold, usually you can get away with some training. However, what I would say, if the training makes you feel really horrible, it's like a really bad headache and your sinuses are killing you, you're usually better off to allow yourself to recover before you really start training again. So, but yes, essentially you need to kind of reset your training, get the recovery, allow your body to recover nearly fully, and then kind of reevaluate where you are with your training and kind of reset through the rest of the season. Whether that means you need to go backwards in your training or whether that means you need to stay on your plan depends on the exact situation. However, again, the keys are making sure that you allow your body to recover, because if you train when you're sick, you're going to prolong the illness. Recover, then you can start training hard again. And again, it depends on the exact situation, whether you jump right back to where you would have been or whether you go back to, where you were before you were sick. I would say late in the season, your fitness is probably pretty good. You've probably done a lot of hard training, a lot of specific training. So late in the season, you're probably going to be okay to just kind of continue on with the plan, how you originally had it set up. But again, there's definitely a lot of caveats to that.
Okay, thank you. This question, you touched on it, but I think it's still a good question for people to hear because I had more than one person ask it. But what do you think about microbursts with a shorter recovery than the effort, maybe like 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off?
So shorter than the effort. So for example, you might do 15 seconds on and then 10 seconds off or 5 seconds off. Yeah, you could experiment with that. It could be really good. I haven't used that with my athletes in particular. I tend to, with the short ones, I tend to like the one-to-one because I can get them to do a lot of them. I think if you make the recovery time even shorter, you're going to find that the power falls off more quickly and you're not able to get as many done. Now, you could say, well, there's a benefit to that. Yes, I agree. So I would say, yeah, go for it. Try some of those. See how your body responds. If you feel like you get a good benefit from that workout, definitely add them in. And as a matter of fact, maybe I'll try that with some people because now is the perfect time for that kind of workout. Because again, that's really super specific to cross racing. So, definitely now is the time to throw some of those in. And, one thing that I didn't mention that might be good to throw out there now is that, we're talking about some of these hard workouts, and pretty much all of these workouts that we've gone through have been, very intense workouts. One question that, and maybe it is even one of the questions, like, well, how many of those hard workouts can I do during a week, when I'm racing on the weekend, or even if you're not racing on the weekend? I mean, I would say in the heart of the cross season, you're going to look at 3 hard workouts during the week, and that includes racing, right? So if you're racing one day on the weekend, you can probably get 2 hard weekdays in. For example, if you're racing on Sunday, you could do maybe hard Tuesday and Thursday, or maybe Wednesday and Thursday. If you're racing twice on the weekend, again, especially late in the season, you might be looking at only getting 1 good, really effective hard workout in, which might be Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Again, you have to see how your body responds and how much recovery you need. But, I just thought of that. I figured I'd throw it out there.
Okay. So the next question is it okay to do the interval training rides on a road bike versus a cross bike?
Absolutely okay on the road bike. Yeah, for sure. A lot of people, have a power meter on their road bike and don't on their cross bike, which is fine. So sometimes some of these real specific hard workouts are awesome on the road bike because you can get the power data. You can make sure that you're pushing yourself as hard as you can and should be. And having that power data is invaluable, especially for your coach. Yeah, no reason not to. However, what I would say is that it is also good from time to time to do some of the hard workouts on the cross bike. What you'll find is that often, if you have a power meter on your cross bike and a power meter on your road bike, you'll find that a lot of times you won't be able to hit the super high power numbers on the cross bike if you're on a dirt, or if you're on the cross bike on the road, that's a different story. Cross bike on the road is essentially a road bike. So you're a little bit extra rolling resistance, no big deal. But if you're talking about cross bike on trail, you should do that from time to time as well, but you can definitely do a lot of these hard interval sessions on the road bike, no problem at all.
Okay. I just have a couple more questions. So this one is a little bit specific to a person, but I think the answer will benefit a lot of people. When I evaluate my race files and my lap times are all within a few seconds of each other, which of the workouts that you talked about would prepare me to be able to react more to attacks and jumps during a race?
Yeah, so all of the short burst efforts, definitely. I would do those for sure. So those 15-15s, things like that would be awesome. The other thing you might consider is doing some slightly longer power interval efforts to hopefully bolster that the high end, bolster that anaerobic fitness, so that you can dig really deep for maybe a little bit longer. Another good answer to that question would be for next season, more likely, would be to really try to do a lot of workouts that help elevate your lactate threshold, because again, the higher your threshold is, certain power you're going to be not as high above it, if that makes sense. Anyway, elevating your threshold is always a good thing for that kind of an issue. But again, that's going to be tough to do here at the end of the season. At this point, probably doing those bursty efforts and maybe some slightly longer power interval VO2 max type efforts would really be beneficial for that. Good question.
Okay. Okay, and then I think we have time for one more question. There's still some other questions we're not going to have time to get through, but I will be sending out a list to Andy of the questions that we're not able to answer online, so he'll be able to reach out to you guys individually with those questions. So the last one I have here is, what percentage on average of FTP do you see these bursts at during the final third of the race for elite riders?
Good question, for sure. Whoops, I lost my screen. Let's go back to that race file that we saw. See if I can get it up here. Again, this is a pretty strong elite rider here. I'm not sure if you can see that yet. It should be coming up. But if you look across, most of the bursts kind of in the last third of the race are 400, 450 watts maybe at the most. So there's definitely a fade there, and that's about 100 watts above threshold. So in this case, it would be 125, 130%. In this particular case, and that's with a fade. So that's at the end of the race. And at the beginning of the race, if you look, you can see it's like, oh wow, it's almost, it's twice threshold, and then some in some cases. But yeah, I mean, and that's something that you will be able to see on your own if you do some of those like 15-15 sessions. You can see how much you fade. Especially if you're doing a long session like a 3x10. It's like, okay, well, what are the peaks of those 15-second efforts in the third 10 minutes versus the first 10 minutes? You can see how much you fade. But that is one of the keys to being a successful cross racer. If you can continue hitting those bursts at the end of the race that you could at the beginning, if they're similar, you're going to be more successful. So I would say, okay, 130%-ish. So it's going to be, well above VO2 max, obviously, for very short efforts. And then depending on the situation of the race, because again, it's kind of situational, especially in the elite racers, because they are like, how hard do they have to go to stay on the wheel, right? If they're on the front, they need to think about, holding back, a couple of percent, right, so that they can attack at the right time, or, things like that. So I would say, 130, 150% is probably the answer there. And again, it depends on a specific situation, but that is what I would expect to see. Okay.
Thanks, Andy. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I will be sending out a link. Once this is archived, you guys will be able to access it via our webinar page, and also we'll be posting it on our TrainingPeaks YouTube channel. So thank you so much for attending today. Andy, thank you for the presentation and for joining us.
Thanks. It was great.
All right. Take care, everyone.